In the last video for Chinese film classics, we talked about the film Long Live the Misses in terms of its Civil War context, the creative vision of screenwriter Eileen Chang, and the theme of deception, both in a domestic family setting and embodied in the figure of the wife, or Mrs. In this video, we'll talk about how Long Live the Misses develops two themes: bitterness, or suffering, and comedy. We'll talk about how the filmmakers modified the Hollywood genre of the screwball comedy, and how, in doing so, create ambivalence. In a comedy, or in a sob story, we might seek catharsis and closure, but that's not always how the world works. Long Live the Misses incorporates elements of a film genre known variously as the screwball comedy and the comedy of remarriage. Films like The Philadelphia Story from 1940 feature an estranged or divorced couple who, having fallen out of love, are jaded about the institution of marriage and wary of romance. Experienced and urbane, they trade barbs and witticisms, and their verbal and sometimes physical sparring and lingering mutual attraction grows more intense as the ex-wife gets closer and closer to remarrying someone else. All along, the question looms: will she take him back? At the last minute, the new wedding is called off, and the divorcees decide to remarry each other. At the center of the comedy of remarriage is the wife, or ex-wife, who must be persuaded, despite past betrayals or misunderstandings, to take her man back. Reconciliation and redemption triumph. The ideology underlying this narrative template could be summed up as follows: the institution of marriage is imperfect, but its virtues outweigh its vices. Some critics consequently view this genre as essentially conservative, showing an unruly woman being tamed and brought back into the social fold. Literary critic Liu Ofan Li has observed these genre conventions at work in literary works by Eileen Chang, notably Love in a Fallen City from 1943. In that famous story, a young Shanghai widow meets a rich bachelor, and much to the chagrin of her former husband's unmarried sisters, she follows him to Hong Kong. There they have an on-again, off-again courtship, but as soon as they consummate it, the man announces that he is going overseas, and the woman recognizes that she is expected to remain behind as a kept woman. Then the Japanese bomb Hong Kong, preventing his ship from sailing, and they end up getting married after all. His eyes turn to other women then, but she at least finds some comfort and satisfaction in having finally become his missus. In Chang's version of the screwball comedy then, the couple is sometimes brought together at the end not by their own actions, but by chance. Eileen Chang once observed that Chinese audiences loved plots with a lot of twists and turns. The more convoluted, the better. And she delivers this in Long Live the Misses, in part by moving beyond the screwball comedy genre's tight focus on the fate of one couple. Instead, she encompasses a broader family sphere, and even a broader social sphere that includes the external threat of a mistress. At stake is not just the happiness of one couple, but the happiness of the family, and the success of an alliance between families. Eileen Chang explicitly mixes comedy and happiness with another emotional register: bitterness. Let's return to the first scene of the film, which we discussed briefly in the last video. In one of Si-jun's attempts to distract her mother-in-law from the broken bowl, she suggests going to see a new play, a weepy. Old Mrs. Tang responds enthusiastically: "I simply adore tragedies, 苦戏. The bitterer, 苦, the better." Later, Si-jun is telling her brother about her new social obligations as a wife, including keeping her husband's guests busy, playing mahjong, and her sister-in-law calls this a bitter duty, 苦差事. Before long, Si-jun's bitterness comes not from a game of mahjong, but a game of seduction. Her gullible husband Zhiyuan is hooked by Shi Mimi's tale of woe, which Mimi also calls a tragedy, 苦戏, so bitter that if it were made into a film, anyone who watched it would cry. Sob stories sell, and to young and old alike. But the suggestion is also that the fate of a missus is bitter. In putting the missus within a family context, the film also shows other family members as having their own individual narratives. Even Si-jun's buffoonish father, for example, has his own sad backstory. As his son tells it, his father once loved a woman named Orchid, who died, and he has been pining for her ever since. Zhuyuan's younger sister, Zhiqian, bursts out laughing at the absurdity of this. But the son informs her that his father used to be quite dashing. Later, when Zhiqian reveals Zhuyuan's infidelity to Sijun's parents, Sijun's mother advises her to take her husband firmly in hand, just as she herself did successfully when her own husband strayed years ago. But before one can call out, "Long live the missus," this father falls in with Mimi's friend and advises Zhuyuan to fob off Sijun with a few promises. So this scene, or the sequence, reveals a conspiracy of men who put their own pleasure first. The two men's escapade ends when Zhuyuan's deputy manager absconds with the company's capital, leaving it bankrupt. This is a device of moral justice, you could say, that would seem to be punishing the straying husband, but in fact, it harms relations between the two families. They completely break down as Sijun's father and Zhuyuan's mother blame each other for raising unreliable children. They prohibit the younger siblings from seeing each other any longer. The old lady now thinks that the young man is just after her non-existent gold bars. And Sijun faces the prospect of having ruined their youngest sibling's happiness. Then Zhuyuan blames her for having persuaded her father that his family was secretly rich, and he tells her he'll divorce her. "Yes, I lied," Sijun admits, "but I did it for your well-being." One of the most striking editing sequences in the film occurs when Mimi's crook of a husband decides to extort money from Zhuyuan. In one shot, he is in the kept woman's apartment, announcing to Mimi his plan to go give Zhuyuan a scare. In the next, he is at the Tang residence, telling Sijun that Mimi is Zhuyuan's wife and that she's pregnant by him. At the beginning of both conversations, the woman is on the left-hand side of the frame, and the man is on the right. The graphic match draws a parallel between the two women, who are being victimized by the same man. Mimi asks, "What if he can't come up with the money?" And her husband, now speaking to Sijun, at the Tang's replies, "Even if he can't come up with the money, he'll have to find a way." This scene, in which one missus visually resembles another, represents the moment when Sijun's lying starts to turn her fortunes yet again. Having gotten the extortionist husband to leave, by lying that Zhuyuan isn't at home, but that she'll give him the message, she then sets off to confront the extortionist wife. At Mimi's apartment, Sijun prepares to put on her act, only to be momentarily taken aback when she spots the brooch and the wireless radio. These luxury commodities, tokens of male affection transferred from one woman to another, reappear just as these women are on the cusp of a final showdown. The lighting, makeup, and close-up camera distance emphasize Sijun's expressive face as she blanches, but then puts on her best smile and perseveres with her best performance yet. If husbands treat their wives like commodities and use them to get money, here Sijun bargains to redeem Mimi for the Tangs on the cheap and invites her to eat bitterness, 吃一口苦饭, with their impoverished family. The last straw for Mimi is when Sijun remarks on how much nicer than her own clothes Mimi's are. Mimi slams shut the wardrobe, whose mirror suddenly turns two missuses into four. We see them front and back. Sijun's lying eventually extorts the truth. There is no baby, and this brother is actually a husband. So at this point, the question is, will she take him back? Zhuyuan, his other woman problem solved, wants to make up with Sijun, but she tells him, "Matters of the heart are not so simple. I won't lie anymore, and I won't be your missus anymore," she vows. "Is there no other way to make amends?" he asks, but she shakes her head and turns away. As Sijun packs to leave, Zhuyuan finds the movie tickets in the brooch case. He's full of remorse, and he goes back one last time to Mimi's to ask her to return the brooch to him. She refuses even to sell it to him, and when he tries to grab it from her by force, she scratches his face, a threatened woman's last defense against a male aggressor. He leaves empty-handed, but he then encounters Mimi's husband in the hallway, and he negotiates to exchange his wristwatch for the brooch. The exchange is carried out as a dumb show. There's no dialogue, with each man communicating only through gestures. The only sounds we hear are the sounds of Mimi resisting inside and getting slapped several times by her husband. Zhuyuan, outside the door, winces hearing the sound, but he still leaves satisfied. In the exchanges between men, the scene suggests, it's the women who suffer. Mimi, the female predator who is herself exploited, might be viewed as a scapegoated version of Sejun. The well-meaning Mrs. is in the habit of telling white lies in an attempt to help or to protect her family members. The woman on the outside is a con woman who seduces men in an attempt to extort money from them. One is an overeager good wife. The other is a stereotypical bad woman. Both engage in serial deception to please an unworthy husband. Some critics see Eileen Chang's own bitter backstory reflected in the plot of her screenplay. The story of a disloyal husband and a suffering woman was one that Eileen Chang was to rewrite again and again over the course of her subsequent career, in novels like Little Reunion. The final shot of the con woman turning her seductive charm towards the audience compounds the irony of this film. Sure, Mimi, and not Chen Sejun, is the last Mrs. we see in Long Live the Misses. Mimi's tale of woe, told with a wink and a smile, warns us that plays for sympathy are not to be trusted. But as film scholar Kenny K.K. has pointed out, this smiling victimizer is indeed a victim herself. Mimi is a fake Mrs. of Druyan's, but a real Mrs. of her pimp husband as well. She does lead a life of woe, even if we only hear and don't see it. In the end, the filmmakers are coy with us, as coy as Mimi is with the men she targets. The final scene suggests that both women, Sejun and Mimi, have a future ahead of them, but the stagey smile challenges us to be wise enough to realize that that future might not be a happy one.